The world stage is constantly shifting, with major events unfolding globally. Amidst this international flux, the political landscape within the United States remains particularly charged, especially concerning former President Donald Trump. Do you believe everyone in America cherishes Trump? Perhaps reconsider. What if entire states exhibit what could be described as a profound aversion to him? We're discussing regions where his presence isn't just unwelcome, but actively opposed. Places where his rallies encounter jeers, his name ignites protests, and his policies are metaphorically torn apart. This isn't mere political disagreement. It's a visceral rejection felt by millions. Why do vast numbers of Americans harbor such intense disdain for him? Is it fundamentally about race, the pursuit of power, perceived falsehoods, or something far more intricate woven into the fabric of American society? The animosity isn't uniform. It varies in intensity and reasoning across different demographics and regions. Some point to his rhetoric on immigration, others to his environmental policies, and many cite concerns over his leadership style and challenges to democratic norms. From bastions of liberalism to unexpected political battlegrounds, certain states didn't merely vote against him. They've made their opposition a core part of their political identity. The level of pushback in some areas is truly astonishing, reflecting a deep chasm between his supporters and detractors. This divide highlights fundamental disagreements about the direction of the country, the role of government, and the very definition of American values. The intensity of this opposition suggests that for many, Trump represents more than just a political figure. He embodies a set of principles and actions they find fundamentally unacceptable. Prepare yourself, because we are about to delve into the 10 U.S. states where the opposition to Trump is most palpable, and they are certainly not keeping their opinions quiet. These states represent a significant portion of the American populace, whose voices shape the national political discourse. Their reasons are varied, complex, and deeply rooted in their unique histories and cultural values. Stay with us as we explore these dynamics, and remember, we'll be drawing conclusions at the end of this analysis. Please consider subscribing to our channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Your support is incredibly important for helping us grow and continue bringing you in-depth analysis. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our audience around the globe. Now, let's begin our countdown. Number 10, California. It's famously the land where aspirations take flight, a state synonymous with innovation and progressive ideals. However, for Donald Trump, it represents a significant political challenge. Envision a place where nearly every action he takes is met with vocal disapproval, widespread protests, and persistent calls for accountability, including impeachment efforts during his presidency. This isn't just passive opposition. It's an active, forceful pushback against his influence. California is the heartland of progressives, a state that prides itself on diversity, environmental consciousness, and social justice initiatives. And what does that mean for Trump? It means it's also the state with perhaps the most organized and vocal resistance to his brand of leadership. The contrast between California's prevailing values and Trump's political platform couldn't be starker. This fundamental clash manifests in numerous ways, from legislative challenges originating in Sacramento to grassroots activism on the streets of its major cities. The state's political machinery, largely controlled by Democrats, has consistently worked to counteract Trump's federal policies, particularly on issues like immigration, climate change, and health care. This resistance isn't confined to political circles. It permeates the cultural landscape as well. From Silicon Valley's tech titans, many of whom have publicly criticized his policies and rhetoric, to Hollywood's prominent stars who frequently use their platforms to voice dissent, Trump has encountered a notably chilly reception in the Golden State. You might be astounded by the sheer depth of the division between California's core values and the tenets of his presidency. The state hasn't supported a Republican presidential candidate since 1988, a testament to its long-standing political alignment. Trump's specific policies concerning immigration, his withdrawal from the Paris Agreement on climate change, and his attempts to dismantle the Affordable Care Act have only served to widen this already significant gap. While one might assume a state as vast and diverse as California would exhibit a more fragmented response, the reality is a remarkably unified front in rejecting his political movement. They aren't just disagreeing. They are actively pushing him and his ideology out. The cultural identity of California, built on principles of inclusivity and forward-thinking policy, finds itself in direct opposition to the nationalist and often polarizing rhetoric associated with Trump. This ideological battle plays out not just in elections, but in the everyday discourse and actions of its citizens and institutions, making California a focal point of the national resistance against him. Please make sure you watch this video until the very end, as we'll be summarizing the key takeaways and offering our concluding thoughts. Number 9. New York. Picture this. Originating from the very state where Donald Trump constructed his entire business and media empire, only to have your own populace consistently turn against you once you entered the political arena. New York is where the man built his legacy, brick by gold-plated brick, yet the state's sentiment towards him now is overwhelmingly negative. The moment he stepped onto the national political stage, it ignited a full-blown confrontation with the city and state he once dominated. His transformation from a New York real estate mogul and reality TV star to a polarizing political figure created a deep rift with his home state. The values and political leanings of New York, particularly New York City, stand in stark contrast to his platform. From the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan, symbols of the financial world he once navigated, to the diverse and vibrant streets of Brooklyn and the other boroughs, Trump's rhetoric finds little resonance. His policies on immigration, trade, and social issues clash fundamentally with the largely liberal and multicultural ethos of the state. This disconnect isn't just theoretical, it's palpable. Protests against his administration were frequent and large-scale in New York City throughout his presidency. His name on buildings became a point of contention, with numerous efforts to remove it. But here's a fascinating twist. One might logically assume that the state that birthed his career would rally behind its native son. The reality, however, is the complete opposite. New York has remained steadfast in its rejection of his political agenda. In fact, it stands as one of the most reliably and overwhelmingly blue states in the entire Union. With every controversy and tweet during his presidency, his image in New York seemed to deteriorate further. His administration's attacks on New York's sanctuary city policies, which aimed to protect undocumented immigrants, only intensified the opposition. It's hardly surprising, then, that he has been met with boos and protests, even at events held within the state. The political leadership in New York, from the governor's office to the city mayors, has consistently opposed his initiatives, often engaging in public and legal battles against his administration. This opposition reflects a broader sentiment among New Yorkers who view his policies and rhetoric as antithetical to the state's identity and values. The deep blue voting patterns confirm this. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden won New York by a margin exceeding 23 percentage points, securing over 60% of the vote. This overwhelming rejection underscores the profound disconnect between Trump and the state that was once the backdrop to his rise. Number 8. Massachusetts. What occurs when a state, renowned for its progressive principles and intellectual heritage, firmly rejects the individual intended to lead the nation? Massachusetts, a cradle of American history and home to some of the world's most prestigious universities, has made its stance unequivocally clear. Donald Trump is not welcome here. You might be taken aback by the intensity with which this state has pushed back against his policies and persona. This isn't just passive disagreement. It's an active and deeply ingrained opposition. Massachusetts has cemented its position, leaving no room for ambiguity. Donald Trump finds no quarter in the Bay State. The resistance is fierce, rooted in a political culture that champions liberal ideals, academic freedom, and social progress. You would be truly amazed at the lengths the state has gone to oppose his agenda. Historically a stronghold of Democratic power, Massachusetts voted overwhelmingly for Joe Biden in 2020, with Biden securing nearly 66% of the vote compared to Trump's 32%. The numbers themselves are staggering and speak volumes about the political climate. In fact, Massachusetts ranks among the most liberal states in the entire country. The vast majority of its electorate supports policies that directly conflict with Trump's agenda, particularly concerning health care, environmental protection, and education. His policies on healthcare reform, his stance on climate change, and what many perceive as a constant undermining of scientific expertise put him directly at odds with the prevailing sentiment in Massachusetts. But consider this intriguing point. Massachusetts was one of the very first states to implement its own comprehensive healthcare system, often cited as a precursor to the Affordable Care Act, the same system Trump sought to dismantle nationally. This fundamental policy difference exemplifies the deep ideological chasm. It wasn't merely the coastal elites or university professors who opposed him. Ordinary citizens in towns and cities across the state echoed this sentiment. Massachusetts voters didn't simply reject Trump's policies. They outright repudiated his divisive rhetoric and leadership style. From tax cuts perceived as benefiting the wealthy to the rollback of environmental safeguards, the actions of his administration sparked fury among Bay-Staters. You might wonder how a state that produced the American Revolution and prides itself on intellectual rigor feels about attacks on science and education. Let's just say they don't take kindly to it. Despite Trump's background in business, a state brimming with Ivy League graduates and entrepreneurs didn't embrace him. Instead, it became evident that his vision for America fundamentally diverged from what Massachusetts residents envisioned for their future. His approval ratings here are expected to remain low for the foreseeable future, reflecting a deep and enduring rejection. Number 7. Vermont. How does a state that embodies independence and cherishes liberal ideals react to a president whose entire platform seems antithetical to its core values? Vermont, the Green Mountain State, known for its picturesque landscapes and fiercely independent spirit, has been at the forefront of the resistance against Donald Trump. You might be astonished to discover that despite its small size, Vermont packs a significant political punch, especially when it comes to opposing ideologies it deems incompatible with its principles. The state, with a population just under 700,000, has maintained a turbulent and consistently oppositional relationship with Trump's presidency, and the electoral results emphatically prove this. Bernie Sanders, Vermont's most famous political figure and a stalwart of the progressive movement, effectively became the face of the national resistance to Trump. His supporters, reflecting the broader sentiment within the state, have been vocal and unwavering in their opposition. But the resistance extends far beyond Sanders' influence. Vermont has resolutely demonstrated its disdain for Trump through consistent voting patterns and deeply ingrained public sentiment. In the 2020 presidential election, Vermont delivered an overwhelming victory for Joe Biden, who captured approximately 66% of the vote, leaving Trump with just under 31%. This significant margin highlights the state's strong preference for progressive politics. Similarly, in 2016, Vermont decisively chose Hillary Clinton over Trump by a large margin. You might question why a state often perceived as rural and perhaps leaning towards traditional values would reject Trump so forcefully. However, Vermont's political identity is complex. While rural, it has a long history of progressive thought and action. Here's the truly striking element. Vermont isn't just another blue state. It's a state defined by deeply held principles. The state's rejection of Trump is fundamentally rooted in its dedication to progressive values, particularly its unwavering commitment to social justice, universal healthcare access, and robust environmental protection. And, predictably, Trump's attacks on these very cornerstones didn't resonate well with Vermonters. When it came to his positions on climate change denial, attempts at healthcare reform that threatened expanded coverage, and even his controversial rhetoric surrounding immigration, the state exhibited zero tolerance. But there's an interesting nuance. Vermont has a reputation for independent thinking, and its residents take this seriously. It isn't about blindly following party lines. Vermonters seek leadership that aligns with their values. Trump, with his polarizing style and policies, was simply not the right fit for the Green Mountain State. You might think a small, predominantly white state would lean conservative, but Vermont's progressive streak dictates that any political movement resembling Trump's divisive approach faces swift and decisive rejection. Vermont's political landscape is unambiguous. If you don't align with their core values of community, environmental stewardship, and social equity, you won't earn their support. Trump didn't just lose the state electorally, he lost the heart of Vermont. Number 6. Illinois. What is the outcome when you merge a vast, diverse population, a formidable Democratic stronghold, and a near-total rejection of Donald Trump's policies? The answer is Illinois. You would be genuinely surprised to learn just how resolutely this Midwestern state stands against him. From the dynamic, bustling streets of Chicago to the quieter agricultural corners of the state, Trump's presidency encountered persistent and significant pushback. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the state's political landscape has remained firmly entrenched against him. Illinois, a state with a complex mix of urban and rural interests, overwhelmingly supported Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Biden secured a decisive victory with a margin of over 17 percentage points, garnering approximately 57.7% of the vote, compared to Trump's 40.6%. This result underscores that Trump's policies and political style simply did not find favor here. The state's urban centers, particularly Chicago, with their diverse populations comprising blue-collar workers, university students, and professionals, saw massive opposition to Trump's stance on immigration, his handling of the economy, and his environmental policies. But the rejection wasn't limited to the cities. Even in more traditionally conservative rural areas, support for Trump eroded as his term progressed. People across the state felt alienated by his rhetoric and actions. What's particularly jaw-dropping is Illinois' status as home to some of the nation's most influential labor unions. And, as you might expect, Trump's antagonistic approach towards labor rights and his administration's attempts to weaken union protections only served to galvanize opposition among Illinois voters, many of whom have strong ties to unionized industries. The workers in the state, many employed in manufacturing and other sectors Trump promised to revitalize, felt betrayed by what they perceived as empty promises. For them, his pledges to bring back jobs didn't materialize in a way that offset the negative impacts of his other policies and his divisive rhetoric. But here's where it becomes truly compelling. Chicago, Illinois' largest metropolis, is often viewed as the epicenter of anti-Trump sentiment in the Midwest. From large-scale protests to political rallies denouncing his administration, the city's progressive energy made it a potent symbol of resistance. Furthermore, when Trump's policies specifically targeted cities like Chicago on matters ranging from crime rates to immigration enforcement, it solidified the state's opposition. It became abundantly clear that Illinois would not tolerate his divisive brand of leadership. You simply won't find a high concentration of Trump supporters in Illinois, and identifying any region of the state where his policies weren't met with deep opposition would be a challenge. Illinois' rejection of Trump wasn't merely a political calculation. It felt personal for many residents. People weren't just disagreeing. They were genuinely outraged by his actions and rhetoric, viewing them as contrary to the state's values and interests. Number 5. Oregon. Envision a state celebrated for its stunning natural beauty, its pioneering spirit in progressive politics, and its deep commitment to environmental sustainability. Now imagine a president whose policies appear to contradict everything that state holds dear. Welcome to Oregon, a state on the Pacific coast that has become a bastion of resistance against Donald Trump. You would be truly amazed by how staunchly this state repudiated him. Oregon, with its verdant forests, forward-thinking cities like Portland and Eugene, and strong emphasis on environmental values, has been a vocal and active opponent of his administration from the very beginning. Trump's disregard for climate change science and his administration's policies concerning public lands ignited intense resistance here. The state's progressive identity, coupled with its environmental consciousness, created a fertile ground for opposition. This wasn't just about political alignment. It was a clash of core values. But it's not solely the state's environmental stance that fueled this opposition. Oregon is also home to a burgeoning urban population that overwhelmingly supports progressive policies. In the 2020 election, Oregon voted decisively for Joe Biden, giving him a margin of victory of over 16 percentage points. This result clearly indicated that Oregonians rejected Trump's vision for the country. From Portland to Eugene, the state's cities are populated by individuals who reject Trump's views on health care, immigration, and social justice. In fact, During his presidency, Oregon, particularly Portland, became a national focal point for massive protests against his handling of racial justice issues and police reform. When Trump deployed federal agents to Portland in 2020 in an attempt to suppress these protests, it only intensified the opposition and drew widespread condemnation, further fueling the fire of resistance. The city's residents, along with people across the state, didn't just disagree with Trump. They actively opposed his presence and influence. But here's the critical point. Oregon's resistance to Trump wasn't confined to its urban centers. Even in smaller, more rural communities, a noticeable political shift occurred. Oregon's communities, though diverse, saw a growing wave of anti-Trump sentiment as his policies on trade, environmental regulations, and federal land management came into effect. Many felt his actions threatened the state's economy and natural heritage. You might be surprised to learn that the state's stance on issues like homelessness, gun control, and police reform became rallying points for anti-Trump sentiment. Oregon's commitment to addressing these complex social issues stood in stark contrast to the approaches often favored by the Trump administration. It became clear that Oregonians wanted leadership that reflected their values of compassion, environmental responsibility, and social progress, and Trump simply didn't align with that vision. The rejection was profound and widespread, cutting across various demographic groups within the state. Number 4. Washington. What happens when a state on the West Coast, recognized for its thriving tech industry, fervent environmental activism, and decidedly progressive politics, decides it has unequivocally had enough of Donald Trump? Washington State has made its position crystal clear. It does not align with Trump's policies or his style of leadership. You would be genuinely astonished to learn just how thoroughly the state pushed back during his presidency. From the tech hubs of Seattle and Redmond to the agricultural lands east of the Cascades, Washington rejected nearly everything Trump stood for. In the 2020 election, Washington delivered a resounding victory for Joe Biden, who won the state by nearly 20 percentage points, securing approximately 58% of the vote. This decisive outcome sent an unambiguous message that Trump's divisive rhetoric and policies were unwelcome in the evergreen state. But consider this. It wasn't solely about who they voted for. Washington's major cities are home to millions of tech workers, scientists, and environmentalists who found Trump's policies deeply problematic. His rollback of environmental regulations and his dismissal of climate change science hit particularly hard in a state that prides itself on its natural beauty and its leadership in the green economy. Residents saw his disregard for scientific consensus as a direct threat to their future and the state's environmental health. Furthermore, Washington is home to some of the nation's largest corporations, including tech giants like Amazon and Microsoft. And predictably, Trump's rhetoric on immigration, particularly concerning H-1B visas crucial for the tech industry, and his approach to international trade, sparked deep divisions and opposition from these influential companies and their workforces. When Trump took a hard stance on these issues, companies vital to Washington's economy didn't remain silent. They pushed back, reflecting the broader sentiment within the state. This is a state where innovation is paramount, and Trump's policies on technology and business often seemed out of step with the forward-looking ethos of Washington's economic drivers. You might be shocked to learn how much resistance emerged from ordinary Washingtonians as well. The state's tradition of political activism runs deep. From climate change advocacy to healthcare access and immigrant rights, Trump's administration consistently failed to align with the core values held by a majority of the state's residents. His response to civil rights movements and the growing national divide over his leadership further solidified the opposition. Protests in Seattle and other cities were common, mirroring the national resistance, but with a distinctly Washingtonian flavor, emphasizing environmental concerns and social justice. The state's residents felt disrespected by his approach to issues they held dear, including social justice and racial equality. The combination of a highly educated populace, a strong environmental consciousness, and a powerful tech sector created a perfect storm of opposition to Donald Trump's presidency. Number 3. Hawaii. What does the political landscape look like when a state, characterized by its profound connections to multiculturalism, its unique history, and its dedication to environmental stewardship, decisively rejects Donald Trump? Hawaii, the Aloha State, stands out as a place fundamentally different from the former president's ideals. You would be genuinely stunned by just how strongly Hawaii opposed Trump's policies throughout his time in office. The state, which heavily relies on tourism, agriculture, and its diverse population, was quick to challenge Trump on numerous fronts. And interestingly, Hawaii's rejection of Trump predates even the 2020 election. As a long-established Democratic stronghold, it's no surprise that the state turned its back on Trump's rhetoric and policy directions. In the 2020 election, Hawaii gave Joe Biden one of his most substantial victories nationwide, with Biden securing over 63% of the vote compared to Trump's approximately 34%. But here's the crucial insight. Hawaii's strong anti-Trump sentiment wasn't merely driven by political elites or activists. It was widespread, cutting across various demographic lines and communities. The state's residents, deeply rooted in the Aloha spirit, a philosophy emphasizing love, respect, and harmony, found Trump's often divisive and confrontational approach deeply unsettling. Hawaii is a place that celebrates inclusivity and unity, and Trump's rhetoric on immigration, race, and national identity simply didn't resonate. His administration's rollback of environmental protections also struck a discordant note in a state that has spent decades grappling with the effects of climate change, such as rising sea levels and coastal erosion, which directly threaten its islands and way of life. Hawaii was already confronting significant environmental stress, and Trump's policies were perceived as exacerbating these challenges, posing a direct threat to the state's future. Furthermore, Hawaii is a profoundly military-connected state with a significant U.S. military presence. While the state generally supports national defense, Trump's erratic foreign policy and unpredictable stance on global alliances and military interventions created unease among the many military families residing there. His approach left many feeling uncertain about the stability of international relations and the well-being of service members. The rejection of Trump was also rooted in the state's economic realities. Hawaii's economy leans heavily on tourism, and Trump's trade wars, visa restrictions, and the alienation of international markets sent shockwaves through this vital industry. Local business owners, particularly those in the tourism sector, viewed his policies as detrimental to Hawaii's economic prospects. Ultimately, the people of Hawaii rejected a president who seemed incapable of uniting the country. Instead, they opted to uphold their values of love, respect, and community, finding Trump's leadership incompatible with the Aloha spirit itself. Number 2. Maryland. What transpires when a state with a rich tapestry of history, significant political activism, and close proximity to the nation's capital decides it has had its fill of Donald Trump's policies? Maryland made its stance exceptionally clear. It wanted no part of Trump's rhetoric or leadership. You would be genuinely surprised by the depth and breadth of the rejection he faced in this state. From the vibrant, bustling streets of Baltimore to the affluent suburbs encircling Washington, D.C., Maryland residents overwhelmingly repudiated Trump's agenda. In the 2020 election, the state delivered a commanding victory for Joe Biden, who won with a staggering 65.4% of the vote, translating to a margin of over 33 percentage points, one of the largest margins in the country. But here's the interesting part. Maryland's position wasn't solely about partisan politics. It was deeply rooted in the state's values and its unique demographic makeup. Maryland is home to a large and influential government workforce, given its proximity to the federal government in D.C. Consequently, Trump's persistent attacks on federal employees and government institutions did not sit well with a significant portion of the state's population, many of whom work for or have family members working in federal agencies. Their livelihoods and professional identities were directly impacted by his rhetoric and policies aimed at downsizing or restructuring the federal bureaucracy. Furthermore, Maryland boasts a highly educated and diverse population. Issues like healthcare, education, and climate change are major priorities for Marylanders. Trump's attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, his skepticism towards climate science, and his proposed cuts to education funding were met with fierce opposition across the state. Residents were deeply concerned about the potential impact of these policies on their communities and their quality of life. You would be shocked to learn how swiftly the state mobilized against him. Marylanders rallied against his policies, participating in numerous protests and organizing efforts. The state's political leadership was also consistently critical of the Trump administration, often joining legal challenges against his executive orders and policy initiatives. This widespread resistance reflects a fundamental clash between the values cherished by Maryland residents: diversity, government service, environmental responsibility, and social progress, and the platform promoted by Donald Trump. The state's strong sense of community and its commitment to these principles led to a widespread rejection of his leadership style, making Maryland one of the most staunchly anti-Trump states on the entire East Coast. The sheer scale of Biden's victory in Maryland serves as a powerful testament to the depth of this opposition. Number 1. Connecticut. What do you get when you combine a highly educated populace, a deep-seated sense of social responsibility, and proximity to the financial and cultural centers of the Northeast? You get Connecticut, arguably the state that exemplifies the most profound rejection of Donald Trump's presidency. With its strong Democratic base and a history of moderate republicanism that has increasingly shifted leftward, the state was swift and decisive in opposing Trump's divisive tactics and policies. You would be truly amazed at the level of unified opposition. In the 2020 election, Connecticut awarded Joe Biden a commanding victory, with Biden securing nearly 60% of the vote, resulting in a lead of over 20 percentage points over Trump. This wasn't just a political preference, it was a statement. But consider this: Connecticut's opposition to Trump wasn't merely about party affiliation. The state's core values clashed intensely with his administration's actions. Connecticut places a high premium on education, health care, and environmental protection. Trump's policies, which often seem to undermine these priorities, were met with significant pushback. His attacks on established scientific consensus regarding climate change, his efforts to weaken healthcare provisions, and rhetoric perceived as devaluing education didn't resonate in a state with numerous prestigious universities and a population that values expertise and data-driven policy. Furthermore, Connecticut's economy, while diverse, includes significant sectors like finance and insurance, which rely on stability and predictable international relations, elements often seen as lacking during Trump's tenure. His approach to trade and foreign policy created uncertainty that was unwelcome in the state's business community. The state's strong sense of community and social cohesion also played a crucial role. Connecticut residents, by and large, rejected the divisive rhetoric and polarizing tactics employed by Trump. His approach to issues like immigration, racial justice, and social welfare programs ran counter to the more inclusive and socially conscious attitudes prevalent in the state. You'd be shocked to see how consistently residents reacted against his attacks on science and healthcare. The state's commitment to these areas is deeply ingrained, and Trump's policies were viewed as a direct assault on these values. From Hartford to New Haven, Stamford to Bridgeport, the sentiment was clear. Trump's vision was not Connecticut's vision. The state's residents, known for their civic engagement, actively participated in protests and political action opposing his administration. This combination of factors, a highly educated population, strong social values, economic concerns, and a rejection of divisive politics, culminated in Connecticut becoming one of the most intensely anti-Trump states in the entire New England region, solidifying its place at the top of our list. And there you have it. 10 states that demonstrated significant opposition to Donald Trump, each with its own unique blend of reasons, from deep-seated progressive values and policy clashes to economic concerns and a rejection of divisive rhetoric. These states, representing diverse regions and populations across America, made their voices heard loud and clear, highlighting the profound divisions that characterized his presidency and continue to shape the American political landscape. The opposition wasn't monolithic. It stemmed from a complex interplay of historical context, cultural identity, policy disagreements, and a fundamental divergence in vision for the country's future. From California's progressive powerhouse to New York's complex relationship with its native son, from Massachusetts' intellectual and healthcare focus to Vermont's independent spirit, from Illinois' union strength to Oregon and Washington's environmental and tech-driven resistance, and from Hawaii's aloha spirit to Maryland and Connecticut's rejection based on values and proximity to federal influence, these states collectively represent a powerful counter-narrative to Trump's political movement. Their sustained opposition underscores the deep fissures in American society and the ongoing debate about the nation's identity and direction. You would be amazed at how consistently these states stood up for what they believed in, demonstrating the enduring power of regional values and political mobilization in the face of a polarizing national figure. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.